Everyone wants to win an argument. But these 45 people took it to an insane extreme, doing things so catastrophically stupid to prove they were right that they destroyed their own lives in the process. Here are the dumbest things people did to win an argument. 1. Someone got a full-body tattoo to win an argument about pain tolerance, spent $15,000, and regretted it for life. During a heated debate with friends about who could handle pain better, this person insisted they had the highest pain tolerance of anyone. Friends were skeptical and mocking. The argument escalated over weeks. To definitively prove the point, the decision was made to get a full-body tattoo in one marathon session. The tattoo artist warned this was extreme and unnecessary, but the determination to win the argument overrode common sense. 36 hours of continuous tattooing began. The pain was excruciating beyond anything imagined. By hour 12, regret was overwhelming, but stopping would mean losing the argument. The session continued. By hour 20, physical illness from the pain and stress set in. The tattoo artist had to take breaks every hour just to let the body recover. By completion at hour 36, the entire torso, back, arms, and legs were covered in an elaborate design that had been chosen hastily just to fill space. Total cost was $15,000. However, winning the argument lasted about 2 days before reality set in. The tattoo was permanent and incredibly visible. Job interviews became nightmares. Professional employers wouldn't hire someone covered in tattoos. The current $85,000 job was lost when promoted positions required client-facing work. Career options became severely limited. Relationships suffered as dating became difficult with such extreme body modification. Laser removal consultations revealed it would cost $60,000 and take years with significant scarring. The pain of removal would exceed the pain of application. 20 years later, the tattoo remained, serving as a permanent reminder that winning one argument cost an entire career and probably $200,000 in lost income over time. The friends from the argument had long since moved away and forgotten about it. The stupidity was getting a full-body tattoo just to win an argument about pain tolerance, spending $15,000, losing career opportunities worth $200,000, being unable to afford removal, and living with permanent regret over winning a meaningless argument. 2. A person quit their $120,000 job to prove their boss wrong about being irreplaceable, then couldn't find comparable work for 3 years. During a performance review, the boss made a comment that everyone is replaceable in response to demands for a large raise. This person took it as a personal insult and challenge. The argument that followed included insisting the boss couldn't possibly replace their specific skills and knowledge. The boss calmly disagreed, noting that while valued, the role wasn't irreplaceable. Furious at not being acknowledged as indispensable, the decision was made to quit immediately to prove the point. The resignation letter was dramatic, explaining that the company would fail without this person's expertise. 2 weeks' notice wasn't given. The goal was to create maximum disruption, proving the point. The boss accepted the resignation without argument, which only increased the anger. Within 2 weeks, a replacement was hired. Within a month, the replacement was performing well. Within 3 months, the company announced record profits. Meanwhile, job hunting revealed a harsh reality. The specialized skills that seemed irreplaceable were actually fairly common in the job market. Interview after interview resulted in offers for $80,000 to $90,000, significant pay cuts. Pride prevented accepting these inferior positions. Taking them would admit the boss was right. Unemployment stretched to 6 months, then a year. Savings were depleted. The house payment became difficult. By 18 months, desperation forced accepting a $75,000 position, a $45,000 annual pay cut. Over 3 years of unemployment and underemployment, the total lost income exceeded $200,000. The old boss never noticed the departure's impact. The company continued thriving. The argument about being irreplaceable was decisively lost, along with career momentum and financial stability. The stupidity was quitting a $120,000 job to prove you were irreplaceable, watching the company easily replace you and thrive, refusing lower-paying jobs out of pride, losing $200,000 in income over 3 years, and proving your boss completely right. 3. Someone spent $50,000 suing a neighbor over a $200 fence dispute to prove they were legally right. A property line disagreement emerged when a neighbor built a fence that supposedly encroached 6 inches onto this person's property. Surveys were inconclusive. Different surveyors measured differently within margins of error. The neighbor offered to split the $200 cost of moving the fence if it made peace. However, this person insisted on being proven legally right through the courts. The principle mattered more than the money. Lawyers were hired at $300 per hour. The neighbor, forced to defend, also hired lawyers. Discovery process dragged on for months. Depositions, document reviews, and expert surveyor witnesses accumulated costs. By the trial date, this person had spent $35,000 in legal fees. The neighbor had spent similar amounts. The trial lasted 3 days. Expert surveyors contradicted each other. Property records from 1950 were examined. The judge finally ruled that yes, technically, the fence was 4.7 inches over the property line and should be moved. Victory was declared. Being legally right was proven. However, the neighbor was ordered to move the fence at their own expense, which cost them $180. Meanwhile, the winner had spent $50,000 in legal fees to win a fence dispute worth $200. The neighbor refused to speak again, making the neighborhood relationship toxic. Property value actually decreased because the hostile neighbor situation was disclosed to future buyers. When selling the house 5 years later, the price was reduced by $15,000 due to the neighbor issues. Winning the argument about 6 inches of fence line cost $65,000 in total. The stupidity was spending $50,000 in legal fees to win a fence dispute worth $200, refusing a $100 settlement offer, creating a toxic neighborhood environment, reducing property value by $15,000, and losing $65,000 total to prove you were legally right. 4. A person ate an entire ghost pepper to win an argument about spice tolerance and ended up hospitalized with $8,000 in medical bills. At a dinner party, conversation turned to spicy food tolerance. This person bragged about being able to handle any level of spice without issue. A friend who loved extremely spicy food challenged this claim. The argument escalated. The friend insisted ghost peppers were beyond most people's tolerance. Pride demanded proving this wrong. A ghost pepper was produced, one of the hottest peppers in the world at over 1 million Scoville units. The friend suggested just tasting a small piece. However, to definitively win the argument, the decision was made to eat the entire pepper. The first bite was manageable for about 10 seconds. Then the capsaicin hit. The burning was unlike anything experienced before. Milk was gulped desperately. The pain intensified. Stomach cramping began. Within 20 minutes, vomiting started and wouldn't stop. The burning in the throat and esophagus was excruciating. Friends called an ambulance as the symptoms worsened. At the emergency room, severe gastritis from the capsaicin was diagnosed. IV fluids were needed for dehydration from vomiting. Medication for the stomach inflammation was administered. The hospital stay lasted 8 hours. Medical bills totaled $8,000 after insurance. The pain continued for 3 days. Eating was difficult for a week. The argument was technically won. The pepper was consumed completely. However, the friend who issued the challenge felt terrible and hadn't wanted anyone actually hurt. The victory felt hollow while paying $8,000 in medical bills and suffering for days. The story became a cautionary tale told at parties about taking arguments too far. The stupidity was eating an entire ghost pepper to win an argument, suffering severe gastritis requiring hospitalization, paying $8,000 in medical bills, being in pain for days, and winning an argument that nobody actually cared about. 5. Someone spent their entire $30,000 savings account, proving they could live off the land after an argument about self-sufficiency. During a political debate about government assistance programs, this person argued that anyone could be completely self-sufficient if they tried hard enough. Friends pointed out the complexities of modern society, making true self-sufficiency nearly impossible. The argument became heated. To prove the point beyond any doubt, the decision was made to buy rural land and live completely self-sufficiently for 1 year. 20 acres were purchased for $25,000 in a remote area. The plan was to grow all food, hunt for protein, and build a shelter using only materials from the land. No modern amenities would be used. No electricity, no store-bought food, no outside help. This would definitively prove the argument. Reality hit immediately. Building a shelter from scratch with no experience took 3 months, and the result was barely weatherproof. Planting crops without knowledge led to most plants dying. Hunting without experience yielded almost no food. By month 4, weight loss was becoming dangerous. Nutritional deficiencies were causing health issues. Pride prevented admitting failure and going back. By month 6, the remaining $5,000 in savings was gone on emergency supplies to survive. A job was necessary. Internet service had to be installed to find work. Electricity was needed. Store-bought food resumed. Within 8 months, the experiment ended in complete failure. The land was sold for $18,000, a $7,000 loss. The savings were depleted. The friends who were proven wrong actually felt bad about the self-destructive experiment. The argument about self-sufficiency was lost, along with $12,000 in total. The stupidity was spending $30,000 trying to live completely off the land to win an argument, failing miserably within 8 months, nearly starving, losing $12,000, and proving yourself completely wrong. 6. A person got plastic surgery to prove they looked younger than their age after an argument, spent $25,000 and looked worse. At a reunion, classmates were discussing how everyone was aging. This person insisted they looked significantly younger than their actual age of 45. Several people politely disagreed. They looked exactly 45. The argument continued into the night. Offense was taken at the suggestion of looking one's age. To prove definitively that a youthful appearance was achievable, the decision was made to get extensive plastic surgery. Consultations with surgeons began immediately. Facelift, eye lift, neck lift, and Botox were planned. The cost would be $25,000. The surgeon suggested a conservative approach, given the client's relatively young age. However, aggressive changes were demanded. The goal was to look undeniably younger than 45. The surgery was performed. However, the aggressive approach resulted in an unnatural appearance. The face looked tight and overdone. The eyes had an unusual shape. The overall effect was someone who had obviously had plastic surgery, which ironically made the age more apparent rather than less. Recovery took 2 months. When unveiling the new look to friends and family, reactions were polite but clearly negative. The attempt to look younger actually made the appearance worse. Online photos from before surgery looked better and more natural. Dating became difficult. Potential partners were put off by the obvious surgical alterations. By age 50, the surgical effects had settled into an appearance that looked older than if nothing had been done. Revision surgeries were quoted at another $30,000. The argument about looking younger was lost, along with $25,000 in natural good looks. The stupidity was getting aggressive plastic surgery to win an argument about looking young, ending up looking worse and obviously altered, spending $25,000, making yourself less attractive, and losing the argument anyway. 7. Someone drove cross-country in 24 hours to win a bet about feasibility, caused an accident from exhaustion, and faced $40,000 in damages. During an argument about physical limits, this person insisted they could drive cross-country approximately 2,800 miles in 24 hours without stopping. Friends said this was not only unlikely but dangerous. The argument escalated. To prove it was absolutely possible, the drive would be attempted. A route was planned covering 2,800 miles from Los Angeles to New York. Energy drinks and coffee were stockpiled. The drive began at 6 a.m. For the first 12 hours, progress was good, averaging 120 miles per hour on highways. However, by hour 15, fatigue was overwhelming. Microsleeps began occurring, brief moments where consciousness lapsed for a few seconds. Energy drinks stopped working. By hour 20, hallucinations appeared on the road. The determination to win the argument kept the drive going despite obvious danger. At hour 22, while driving through Pennsylvania, a microsleep lasted longer than the others. The car drifted into the shoulder, overcorrected, and collided with another vehicle. Miraculously, injuries were minor. However, the car was totaled. The other driver's car was heavily damaged. Citations for reckless driving were issued. Insurance didn't cover the accident due to the admitted intentional reckless behavior of attempting a 24-hour cross-country drive. The other driver's damages totaled $25,000. This person's car replacement cost $15,000. Medical bills added $5,000. Legal fees were $8,000. Total cost was $53,000. The drive took 22 hours before the crash, failing to even complete the challenge. The argument was lost, along with $53,000 and a clean driving record. The stupidity was attempting a dangerous 24-hour cross-country drive to win a bet, driving while severely sleep-deprived, causing an accident at hour 22, paying $53,000 in damages, and failing to even complete the challenge. 8. A person went to medical school for one semester to prove their spouse wrong about being smart enough, spent $35,000, and dropped out. During a marriage argument, the spouse suggested this person wasn't smart enough for certain career paths. Though probably not meant seriously, deep offense was taken. The argument escalated over days. To prove intellectual capability beyond any doubt, applications to medical school were submitted. Against odds, acceptance was received at a lower-tier medical school. The spouse tried to clarify the comment wasn't serious, and medical school wasn't necessary to prove anything. However, enrollment proceeded to definitively win the argument. Tuition for the first semester was $35,000. The coursework was immediately overwhelming. Organic chemistry, anatomy, and biology at medical school level far exceeded undergraduate difficulty. Study consumed 80 hours per week. The stress was crushing. By week 8, failing grades were appearing. The realization hit that completing medical school was genuinely impossible without aptitude and years of commitment. By week 12, dropping out became necessary to avoid failing out. The argument was won. Enrollment in medical school proved it was possible. However, the spouse felt terrible about the comment that sparked this. The $35,000 tuition was non-refundable. The semester of extreme stress accomplished nothing. The original career was abandoned for medical school and now had to be restarted. The marriage was strained by the financial loss. The argument about intelligence was won, but at catastrophic cost. The stupidity was enrolling in medical school just to prove your spouse wrong, spending $35,000 on one semester, dropping out after 12 weeks, wasting the money and time, and straining your marriage to win an argument. 9. Someone quit eating for a week to win an argument about fasting, passed out at work, and got fired from their $90,000 job. A discussion about fasting for health turned into an argument about how long humans can safely go without food. This person insisted that a week without food was perfectly safe and healthy. Coworkers expressed concern that this was dangerous. The argument became heated. To prove it was completely safe, a 1-week water-only fast would be undertaken while maintaining normal work activities. The fast began on Monday. By Wednesday, energy levels were dramatically reduced. Concentration was becoming difficult. Coworkers noticed the irritability and strange behavior. By Thursday, physical weakness was obvious. Standing required effort. By Friday, the body was in crisis. During an important client meeting, consciousness was lost and a complete collapse occurred. Paramedics were called. At the hospital, severe dehydration and dangerously low blood sugar were diagnosed. IV fluids and nutrition were administered. The hospital stay lasted overnight. When returning to work Monday, a meeting with HR was scheduled. The client meeting disruption was deemed unprofessional and reckless. Deliberately fasting to the point of collapse showed poor judgment. Termination occurred for bringing personal issues into client meetings. The $90,000 job was lost. Medical bills from the hospital were $6,000. Unemployment benefits were denied for misconduct. Finding new work took 4 months. The lost income exceeded $30,000. The argument about fasting being safe was definitively lost when collapsing at work. The stupidity was fasting for a week to win an argument, passing out during a client meeting, getting fired from your $90,000 job, paying $6,000 in medical bills, losing $30,000 in income, and proving yourself dangerously wrong. 10. A person bought a $60,000 sports car to prove they were successful after an argument with siblings, then couldn't afford the payments. During a family gathering, siblings were discussing career success. This person's career in retail management was somehow portrayed as less successful than siblings in corporate positions. Arguments about the definition of success followed. Pride was wounded deeply. To prove success beyond any argument, a brand new $60,000 sports car was purchased the following week. The car would be driven to the next family gathering to show everyone the success they doubted. However, the purchase was financed with minimal down payment. Monthly payments were $1,100, barely affordable on a $65,000 annual salary. Insurance on the sports car was $400 monthly. Gas costs were $300 monthly. Total monthly car expenses were $1,800, leaving almost nothing for other needs. By month 3, credit cards were being used for basic expenses. By month 6, credit card debt exceeded $15,000. By month 9, missing car payments began. The car was repossessed at month 12. At the next family gathering, arriving by bus after the car repossession was humiliating. Siblings felt bad. They hadn't meant to insult and certainly hadn't wanted this financial disaster. The car repossession left a debt of $25,000 after auction sale. Bankruptcy was filed. 7 years of destroyed credit followed. The argument about success was lost spectacularly. The stupidity was buying a $60,000 sports car you couldn't afford to prove you were successful, missing payments within a year, having it repossessed, owing $25,000, filing bankruptcy, and proving yourself financially irresponsible. 11. Someone got a law degree to win an argument about a legal technicality, spent $150,000 in student loans, and never practiced law. During a heated debate about a specific legal issue, this person took a strong position about what the law said. A friend who was a lawyer explained that the interpretation was incorrect. Refusing to accept this, insistence that the friend was wrong continued. The argument became about who understood law better. To prove absolute mastery of legal knowledge beyond any question, law school enrollment began. The spouse and family tried to explain this was an insane overreaction to one argument. However, determination to be proven right overrode logic. 3 years and $150,000 in student loans later, a law degree was earned. The specific legal issue from the original argument was researched exhaustively. The conclusion? The friend was correct, the original position was wrong. The law degree proved the opposite of the intended point. Now, $150,000 in debt with a law degree that wouldn't be used. There was no desire to actually practice law, only to win an argument. Bar exam wasn't taken. Employment remained the same $55,000 job. Student loan payments of $1,700 monthly began. Over 20 years, the total paid on the loans would exceed $400,000 with interest. The friend from the original argument didn't even remember the specific debate. The stupidity was getting a law degree just to win an argument about a legal technicality, spending $150,000, discovering you were wrong anyway, never using the degree, paying $400,000 over 20 years in loans, and wasting 3 years of your life. 12. A person ate glass to prove it was technically possible after an argument, suffered severe internal injuries, and paid $45,000 in medical costs. During a bar discussion about what was physically possible, someone mentioned that eating glass would kill you. This person argued that technically very small amounts of finely crushed glass could be consumed without dying. It was a matter of size and amount. Others said this was insane and nobody should test it. The argument escalated. To definitively prove the point was correct, the decision was made to actually eat crushed glass. A glass bottle was wrapped in cloth and smashed into very fine pieces. The smallest shards were selected. Against all sense and judgment, the glass pieces were swallowed. For about an hour, nothing felt wrong. Victory seemed achieved. However, internal damage was occurring. By hour 3, severe abdominal pain began. By hour 5, internal bleeding was suspected. Emergency room visit confirmed glass had lacerated the esophagus, stomach, and intestines in multiple places. Emergency surgery was required to repair the damage. The hospital stay lasted a week. Complications included infection, requiring additional procedures. Total medical costs exceeded $45,000 after insurance. Recovery took 3 months. Permanent scarring of the digestive tract resulted. The argument was technically won. Small amounts of glass can be consumed without immediate death. However, the internal injuries and $45,000 cost made it a catastrophic victory. The stupidity was eating crushed glass to prove it was technically possible, suffering severe internal injuries requiring emergency surgery, paying $45,000 in medical costs, having permanent digestive damage, and winning the most Pyrrhic victory ever. 13. Someone stayed awake for 9 days straight to win a bet about sleep deprivation limits, suffered a psychotic break, and required psychiatric hospitalization. An argument emerged about how long humans could go without sleep. This person insisted they could easily stay awake for a week or more. Friends said this was dangerous and pointed to research showing severe cognitive impairment after just a few days. To prove the research was exaggerated and personal willpower was stronger, the decision was made to stay awake for as long as possible. Energy drinks and caffeine pills maintained wakefulness. By day 3, hallucinations began, shadows moving, voices that weren't there. By day 5, paranoia was setting in. By day 7, grip on reality was slipping. Friends begged for the experiment to stop. However, stopping meant losing the argument. By day 9, a complete psychotic break occurred. Screaming about conspiracies, attacking friends, and destroying property followed. Police were called. Emergency psychiatric hold was enacted. At the hospital, severe sleep deprivation psychosis was diagnosed. The hospitalization lasted 2 weeks as the brain recovered. Psychiatric care costs exceeded $30,000. Some cognitive effects persisted for months after. The argument about sleep deprivation was lost when requiring psychiatric hospitalization. Friends refused to speak again. The frightening psychotic episode had traumatized them. The stupidity was staying awake for 9 days to win an argument, suffering a psychotic break, requiring psychiatric hospitalization, paying $30,000 in medical costs, potentially suffering permanent cognitive damage, and losing all friendships. 14. A person moved to Alaska to prove they could handle the cold after an argument, lasted 4 months, and lost $20,000 on the failed move. During a discussion about climate resilience, this person insisted cold weather was merely psychological and anyone could adapt easily. Friends from Alaska explained it was much harder than outsiders realized. The argument intensified. To prove adaptability to extreme cold was just about mental toughness, moving to Alaska permanently was announced. Friends tried to explain this was unnecessary to prove anything. However, the decision was final. A job transfer was requested. Shipping belongings to Anchorage cost $5,000. A new apartment lease was signed for a year. The first month seemed manageable. October weather wasn't extreme yet. By November, temperatures dropped to -10 degrees Fahrenheit regularly. The cold was brutal. By December, temperatures hit -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Going outside felt painful. Seasonal affective disorder from 3 hours of daily sunlight hit hard. Depression set in. By January, the misery was unbearable. The job was quit. The lease was broken, costing $8,000 in penalties. Moving back to the lower 48 cost another $5,000. Total loss was $20,000 for a 4-month failed experiment. The friends were sympathetic rather than victorious. They'd hoped to be wrong. The argument about cold being psychological was lost. The stupidity was moving to Alaska to prove you could handle extreme cold, lasting only 4 months, breaking your lease, losing $20,000, suffering severe depression, and proving yourself completely wrong. 15. Someone learned to speak Mandarin to win an argument about language difficulty, spent 3 years and $15,000, then never used it. During a debate about which languages were hardest to learn, this person insisted Mandarin wasn't particularly difficult. Friends who had studied languages disagreed strongly. The argument became about whether Mandarin was genuinely hard or just perceived as hard. To prove it was easy and anyone could learn it, enrollment in intensive Mandarin courses began. Evening classes cost $300 monthly. Tutoring added $400 monthly. 3 years of dedicated study cost $15,000 total. Thousands of hours were invested. By year 3, conversational fluency was achieved. The point was proven: Mandarin could be learned. However, the friends who cared about the argument had moved away during those 3 years. Nobody remembered or cared about the original debate. The Mandarin skill was never used. There was no Chinese community nearby, and work didn't require it. 3 years and $15,000 were spent winning an argument nobody remembered. The skill atrophied from disuse. Eventually, most of the Mandarin was forgotten. The stupidity was spending 3 years and $15,000 learning Mandarin to win an argument, proving it could be done but at massive cost, never using the skill, having everyone forget the original argument, and wasting 3 years on a meaningless point. 16. A person quit drinking alcohol to prove they didn't have a problem after an intervention, then relapsed publicly and lost their family. Family members expressed concern about drinking habits during a gathering. This person insisted there was no problem, and drinking was completely under control. The family suggested professional evaluation. Offense was taken at the implication of addiction. To prove absolute control over drinking, quitting completely was announced. The family said this wasn't necessary. Moderation was the concern. However, to win the argument definitively, sobriety would demonstrate total control. For 6 months, not a drop of alcohol was consumed. Family members were impressed and relieved. However, the goal was only to win the argument, not address underlying issues. Once 6 months passed and the point was proven, drinking resumed. Within weeks, consumption increased to previous levels. Within months, it was worse than before. One night at a family gathering, heavy drinking occurred throughout the evening. By night's end, an alcohol-fueled argument erupted. Offensive things were said to family members. The behavior was destructive and painful. Family members left and subsequently cut contact. The spouse demanded separation. Within a week, the marriage was over and family relationships were destroyed. The sobriety was only performative to win an argument, not genuine recovery. The family had been right, there was a problem. The stupidity was quitting drinking only to prove you didn't have a problem, resuming and getting worse, destroying your family relationships through drunken behavior, losing your marriage, and proving your family completely right about your addiction. 17. Someone climbed Mount Kilimanjaro to prove they were more adventurous than their ex, spent $12,000, and suffered permanent altitude damage. After a breakup, the ex began posting adventure travel photos on social media. Mutual friends commented on how adventurous and exciting the ex's life was. This person insisted they were equally or more adventurous. Friends were skeptical. To prove adventurousness beyond doubt, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was announced, one of the tallest mountains in the world. The ex's travels didn't include anything that extreme. Training began immediately despite no mountaineering experience. The expedition cost $12,000, including guides, equipment, and travel. Physical preparation was inadequate. The climb began with high confidence. However, by day 3, altitude sickness was severe. Headaches, nausea, and dizziness were overwhelming. Guides suggested descending. However, descending meant losing the argument. The ex would remain more adventurous. The summit push continued. At 19,000 feet, high-altitude cerebral edema began. Judgment was impaired. Guides insisted on immediate descent. Reluctantly, evacuation began. Emergency descent saved life, but permanent damage occurred. Cognitive function was impaired afterward. Memory problems persisted. The ex didn't even know about or care about the climb. They'd moved on with their life. The $12,000 in permanent brain damage were spent winning an argument the ex wasn't participating in. The stupidity was climbing Kilimanjaro without proper preparation to prove you were more adventurous than your ex, suffering severe altitude sickness, developing permanent brain damage, spending $12,000, and competing in an argument your ex wasn't having. 18. A person got a PhD to prove they were smarter than their sibling, spent 7 years and $100,000, and ended up in the same career. Sibling rivalry escalated when one sibling earned a master's degree and was celebrated by family. This person felt overshadowed. During family gatherings, the master's degree was mentioned frequently. Arguments about educational achievement followed. To definitively prove superior intelligence, enrollment in a PhD program began. The sibling tried to explain this was unnecessary competition. However, winning the argument required surpassing the master's degree. 7 years of doctoral work followed. Student loans totaled $100,000. Relationships suffered from the time commitment. Mental health declined from academic stress. Finally, the PhD was earned. At family gatherings, the doctorate was announced. Parents were proud of both children. However, the sibling with the master's degree had spent those 7 years advancing their career. They now earned $150,000 annually. This person with the new PhD found that career positions didn't pay more than master's degree holders in the same field. Both ended up in similar jobs at similar salaries. The 7 years and $100,000 invested in winning resulted in no actual advantage. The family didn't care about educational competition. They loved both children equally. The stupidity was spending 7 years and $100,000 earning a PhD to prove you were smarter than your sibling, ending up in the same career at the same salary, wasting 7 years and learning your family didn't care about the competition. 19. Someone refused medical treatment to prove doctors were wrong about their diagnosis, became disabled, and sued unsuccessfully. Diagnosed with a treatable condition requiring surgery, this person disagreed with the diagnosis. Multiple doctors confirmed the same diagnosis. Arguments with medical professionals followed. Insistence that doctors were wrong and the condition would resolve naturally was maintained. Family begged for treatment. However, accepting treatment would mean admitting the doctors were right. To prove them wrong, treatment was refused. Months passed. The condition worsened. By 1 year, irreversible damage had occurred. The condition that was easily treatable early on now caused permanent disability. Admission to the hospital was finally necessary when the pain became unbearable. At this point, the damage couldn't be fully repaired. Partial disability remained permanently. A lawsuit was filed against the doctors for not convincing me to get treatment. The lawsuit argued doctors should have done more to force treatment. The case was dismissed immediately. Adults have the right to refuse treatment. The doctors had documented multiple warnings and recommendations. The argument with doctors was lost, along with full physical function. The stupidity was refusing medical treatment to prove doctors were wrong, suffering permanent disability when the condition worsened, suing unsuccessfully, and destroying your health to win an unwinnable argument with medical professionals. 20. A person bought a house they couldn't afford to prove they were financially responsible to their partner, faced foreclosure within 2 years. During relationship arguments about money management, the partner expressed concern about financial decisions. This person insisted they were financially responsible and capable. The partner suggested saving more before major purchases. To prove financial capability beyond doubt, house hunting began immediately. A $400,000 house was purchased with minimum down payment. The mortgage was $2,800 monthly, barely manageable on a $70,000 salary. The partner warned this was too much house. However, the purchase proceeded to win the argument. For the first year, payments were made by cutting all other expenses. No savings occurred. Credit cards covered emergencies. By 18 months, credit card debt exceeded $20,000. By month 20, making mortgage payments became impossible. The partner had been right. The house was unaffordable. Foreclosure proceedings began at month 24. The house sold for $380,000. After fees and penalties, $35,000 was still owed. The relationship ended. The partner couldn't stay with someone who chose ego over financial reality. Credit was destroyed. The argument about financial responsibility was lost. The stupidity was buying a $400,000 house you couldn't afford to prove you were financially responsible, facing foreclosure within 2 years, losing the house and $35,000, destroying your credit, ending your relationship, and proving yourself financially irresponsible. 21. Someone got into a physical fight to prove they were tougher than someone online, was arrested and served 6 months in jail. An online argument about toughness escalated over weeks. This person insisted they were tougher than the other person. The other person suggested meeting in person to settle it. Despite everyone saying this was stupid, the meeting was arranged. The goal was to definitively prove toughness. At the meeting, the confrontation immediately became physical. However, the fight went badly. The other person was actually trained in fighting. Injuries included a broken nose and fractured ribs. However, continuing to fight seemed necessary to win. Witnesses called police. Both people were arrested when officers arrived. Assault charges were filed against both. The court didn't care who started it or why. Mutual combat is still illegal. Conviction resulted in 6 months in jail. The $60,000 job was lost. Criminal record made finding new work difficult. The online argument about toughness was lost when going to jail. The stupidity was meeting someone in person to physically fight over an online argument, losing the fight badly, being arrested, serving 6 months in jail, losing your $60,000 job, and getting a criminal record over proving you were tough. 22. A person stayed in a toxic marriage for 5 extra years to prove they could make it work after arguments with family, then finally divorced anyway. Family members expressed concern about the marriage during gatherings. They suggested the relationship seemed unhealthy. This person insisted the marriage was fine and could work. Family continued expressing worry over years. Arguments followed about whether the marriage should continue. To prove family wrong and the marriage could work, staying became a point of pride. Couples therapy was refused. That would admit problems existed. 5 years of increasing unhappiness followed. Fights were frequent, emotional health deteriorated. Friends noticed the obvious misery. Finally, after 5 years of proving the point, divorce papers were filed. The marriage couldn't work despite years of trying. Family members were sympathetic. They'd wanted to be wrong. 5 years of life were lost being unhappy just to win an argument. The divorce cost $25,000 in legal fees. The emotional damage took years to heal. The stupidity was staying in a toxic marriage 5 extra years to prove your family wrong, being miserable the entire time, divorcing anyway, paying $25,000, losing 5 years of your life, and proving your family right. 23. Someone started a business to prove their spouse wrong about business acumen, lost $80,000, and destroyed the marriage. During an argument, the spouse suggested this person didn't have the skills to run a business. Offense was taken. To prove business capability, a business was started. The spouse said this wasn't necessary to prove anything. However, $80,000 in savings was invested in a retail store. No business experience existed. No market research was done. The location was poor. Inventory didn't match demand. Within 6 months, monthly losses exceeded $10,000. Within a year, all $80,000 was gone. The business closed. The spouse had been right. Business skills were lacking. However, the $80,000 spent was joint marital savings. The spouse was furious that their life savings were destroyed to win an argument. Divorce followed. The settlement cost another $30,000. The stupidity was starting a business to prove your spouse wrong, losing $80,000 in savings, proving them right, destroying your marriage, paying $30,000 in divorce costs, and losing $110,000 total to win an argument. 24. A person completed an Ironman triathlon to prove they were athletic after being called out of shape, suffered a heart attack during the race. Called out of shape by a colleague during a casual conversation, deep offense was taken. Arguments about fitness levels followed over weeks. To prove athletic capability beyond doubt, registering for an Ironman triathlon was announced. 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and a full 26.2-mile marathon. The colleague tried to explain they hadn't meant it seriously. However, the training began. 6 months of intense preparation followed, despite no previous endurance experience. The body wasn't ready for this intensity. Race day arrived. The swim completed successfully. The bike ride was grueling but managed. The marathon began with determination. At mile 18, chest pain started. At mile 20, the heart attack occurred. Collapse on the course brought immediate medical attention. Emergency surgery saved life. Hospital stay lasted 2 weeks. Medical bills exceeded $60,000. Cardiac damage was permanent. Exercise capacity would be limited forever. The colleague felt terrible. Their comment had nearly caused death. The argument about being athletic was lost. The stupidity was attempting an Ironman without proper preparation to prove you were athletic. Suffering a heart attack at mile 20, needing emergency heart surgery, paying $60,000 in medical bills, having permanent heart damage, and almost dying to win an argument. 25. Someone got a pilot's license to prove planes weren't scary after an argument. Spent $25,000, never flew again after barely passing. During a discussion about flying, this person insisted airplanes were completely safe and fear of flying was irrational. A friend with flight anxiety explained it was about control, not rationality. Arguments followed about whether flying was objectively safe. To prove the point absolutely, flight training was undertaken. Learning to fly would demonstrate complete confidence. Training cost $25,000, including aircraft rental, instructor fees, and testing. The process was terrifying. Every lesson brought anxiety about mechanical failure. The fear that flying was scary became confirmed rather than disproven. Ground school revealed all the things that could go wrong. By solo flight time, panic attacks were occurring. The check ride barely passed. The pilot's license was earned, but the experience proved flying was actually scary. The $25,000 was spent proving the opposite of the intended point. The license was never used again. The fear was now worse. The stupidity was spending $25,000 learning to fly to prove flying wasn't scary, discovering it was terrifying, barely passing, never flying again, and proving yourself wrong. 26. A person quit their job to prove they could find better after their boss said opportunities were limited, then was unemployed for 18 months. During a performance review, the boss explained that advancement opportunities at the company were currently limited. This person took it as a challenge, an insult. Arguments about career prospects followed. The boss tried to clarify it wasn't personal. To prove better opportunities existed everywhere, quitting was announced. The boss tried to convince them to stay. However, resignation was final. Better jobs would be found immediately. Job hunting began. Weeks passed, interviews led nowhere. Months passed. The better jobs weren't materializing. By 6 months, desperation set in. By a year, savings were gone. By 18 months, any job would do. Eventually, a position was found paying $15,000 less than the old job. The old boss had been right. Opportunities were limited industry-wide, not just at that company. The stupidity was quitting your job to prove you could find better. Being unemployed 18 months, depleting savings, accepting a job paying $15,000 less, losing over $100,000 in income, and proving your boss right. 27. Someone invested their entire $200,000 inheritance in cryptocurrency to prove their financial advisor wrong, lost 90% when it crashed. Receiving a $200,000 inheritance. Professional financial advice recommended diversification. This person insisted cryptocurrency was the future and traditional investing was outdated. The advisor warned about volatility and risk. Arguments about investment strategy followed. To prove the advisor wrong, the entire $200,000 was invested in various cryptocurrencies at peak prices. For 3 months, values increased. Victory seemed certain. However, the crypto market crashed. Within 6 months, the $200,000 became $20,000. The advisor had been right about risk. The inheritance was devastated. The stupidity was investing $200,000 in cryptocurrency to prove your financial advisor wrong, watching it crash 90%, losing $180,000, and proving traditional investing advice correct. 28. A person confronted their boss about being wrong in a meeting, was fired, sued for wrongful termination, and lost $40,000. During a company meeting, the boss made a statement that was factually incorrect. This person interrupted to correct them publicly. The boss was embarrassed. After the meeting, warnings about professional behavior were given. However, the point was that being right mattered. Days later, another meeting occurred. Again, the boss was corrected publicly. Termination followed for insubordination. A wrongful termination lawsuit was filed. Being factually correct shouldn't result in firing. Legal fees reached $40,000. The case was lost. At-will employment allows firing for any non-protected reason. The stupidity was publicly correcting your boss repeatedly, being fired for insubordination, suing and losing, paying $40,000 in legal fees, and learning being right doesn't prevent consequences. 29. Someone refused to apologize to their partner to prove they were not wrong. Lost a 10-year relationship over refusing to say sorry. An argument with a long-term partner escalated. Both people said hurtful things. The partner apologized. This person refused. Apologizing would mean admitting fault. Days passed. The partner asked for any apology. Refusal continued based on principle. Weeks passed. The partner said the relationship couldn't continue without acknowledgement. Refusal persisted. By month 3, the partner left. The 10-year relationship ended. Eventually, the realization hit that being not wrong wasn't worth losing the relationship. However, by then it was too late. The partner had moved on. The stupidity was refusing to apologize to prove you weren't wrong, losing a 10-year relationship, realizing too late that being right wasn't worth it, and destroying your future over pride. 30. A person bought a $40,000 motorcycle to prove they weren't too old for it after an argument, crashed within a month, and suffered permanent injuries. Called too old for motorcycles at age 55, offense was taken. Arguments about age and capability followed. To prove age was irrelevant, a high-performance motorcycle was purchased for $40,000. No motorcycle experience existed. Training was skipped. That would admit difficulty. Within a month, inexperience led to a crash at high speed. Injuries included broken pelvis, fractured vertebrae, and traumatic brain injury. Hospital stay lasted 6 weeks. Rehabilitation took 6 months. Permanent mobility issues remained. The motorcycle was totaled. Medical bills exceeded $100,000. The stupidity was buying a $40,000 motorcycle without experience to prove you weren't too old. Crashing within a month, suffering permanent injuries, paying $100,000 in medical bills, and proving you weren't ready. 31. Someone got a face tattoo to prove they didn't care what people thought after criticism, became unemployable in their $80,000 career. After receiving criticism about life choices, this person insisted they didn't care what others thought. Friends said some things do matter socially. To prove complete independence from social opinion, a large face tattoo was gotten. The job in corporate sales was lost immediately. Face tattoos violated professional standards. New job hunting revealed that most employers wouldn't hire someone with a face tattoo. After a year of unemployment, only minimum wage positions were available. The career earning $80,000 was over. Over 10 years, the lost income exceeded $700,000. The stupidity was getting a face tattoo to prove you didn't care what people thought, losing your $80,000 job, becoming unemployable in your field, and losing $700,000 over a decade. 32. A person moved across the country away from family to prove they didn't need them after an argument. Lasted 6 months in isolation. After a family disagreement, things were said about being too dependent on family support. This person insisted complete independence was possible. To prove family wasn't needed, moving 2,000 miles away was announced. The move cost $8,000. For 6 months, isolation and loneliness were overwhelming. No support system existed. An emergency required help and nobody was nearby. Eventually, moving back cost another $8,000. The stupidity was moving 2,000 miles away to prove you didn't need family, being miserable for 6 months, moving back and losing $16,000 to win an argument. 33. Someone pursued a lawsuit for 5 years over a $500 dispute to prove they were right, spent $35,000 in legal fees. A dispute with a contractor over $500 of work escalated. Legal action was threatened. The contractor offered $300 to settle. However, the principle of being right mattered more. Lawsuits were filed. Appeals followed. 5 years and $35,000 in legal fees later, the case was won. The contractor paid the $500. However, the net loss was $34,500. The stupidity was pursuing a 5-year lawsuit over $500, spending $35,000 to win, receiving $500, losing $34,500, and proving being right isn't worth it. 34. A person joined the military to prove their parent wrong about discipline, lasted 6 months, received a dishonorable discharge. After arguments about lacking discipline, a parent suggested military structure might help. This person insisted they had plenty of discipline already. To prove the parent wrong, joining the military was announced. The parent tried to explain that wasn't what they meant. However, enlistment proceeded. Within weeks, the structure was overwhelming. By 3 months, conflicts with superiors occurred constantly. By 6 months, serious violations led to dishonorable discharge. Future employment was severely limited, with a dishonorable discharge on record. The stupidity was joining the military to prove your parent wrong, lasting 6 months, being dishonorably discharged, and damaging employment prospects forever. 35. Someone refused chemotherapy to prove doctors were wrong about cancer treatment, died within 2 years. Diagnosed with treatable cancer, medical recommendations for chemotherapy followed. This person disagreed with the approach and insisted natural treatments would work. Doctors strongly recommended conventional treatment. Arguments about medical science versus natural healing followed. To prove doctors wrong, chemotherapy was refused. Natural treatments were pursued exclusively. Within a year, the cancer had spread. Within 2 years, death occurred. The treatable cancer became terminal through refusing treatment. The stupidity was refusing chemotherapy to prove doctors wrong. Watching cancer spread. Dying within 2 years and losing your life to win an argument. 36. A person ran a marathon without training to prove their friend wrong about needing preparation, suffered permanent knee damage. After a friend suggested marathon training was necessary, this person insisted natural fitness was enough. Arguments about preparation versus natural ability followed. To prove training was unnecessary, marathon registration occurred. No training was done. Race day arrived. The first 10 miles were manageable. By mile 15, knee pain was severe. By mile 20, cartilage damage was occurring. Finishing the marathon caused permanent knee damage requiring surgery. The stupidity was running a marathon without training to prove your friend wrong, suffering permanent knee damage, needing surgery, proving training was necessary, and having chronic pain forever. 37. Someone started smoking to prove they wouldn't get addicted after an argument about willpower, became addicted for 20 years. During a discussion about addiction, this person insisted willpower could prevent addiction easily. Friends said addiction was more complex. To prove willpower was enough, starting smoking was announced as an experiment. The plan was to smoke for a month, then quit easily. Within weeks, addiction developed. Attempts to quit failed repeatedly. 20 years of smoking followed. Health consequences included emphysema. The stupidity was starting smoking to prove you wouldn't get addicted, becoming addicted for 20 years, developing emphysema, and proving yourself catastrophically wrong. 38. A person bought a boat to prove they were adventurous after being called boring, used it twice, lost $30,000 selling it. Called boring by friends, offense was taken. To prove adventurousness, a $50,000 boat was purchased. The boat was used twice. Both times were unenjoyable experiences. Storage cost $500 monthly. Maintenance was expensive. After 2 years of ownership, selling the barely used boat recovered $20,000. The net loss was $30,000 plus storage fees. The stupidity was buying a $50,000 boat to prove you were adventurous, using it twice, paying storage for 2 years, selling for $20,000 and losing $30,000. 39. Someone got pregnant to prove they were ready for kids after their partner expressed doubts, then admitted they weren't ready. After a partner expressed uncertainty about readiness for children, this person insisted they were absolutely ready. To prove readiness, secretly stopping birth control occurred. Pregnancy resulted. However, after becoming pregnant, the reality of unreadiness became obvious. The partner was furious about the deception. The relationship ended. Single parenthood followed. The stupidity was getting pregnant to win an argument about readiness, realizing you actually weren't ready, losing your partner, and becoming a struggling single parent. 40. A person bought a $100,000 Tesla to prove electric cars were practical, then couldn't charge it at their apartment. After arguing electric cars were completely practical, a $100,000 Tesla was purchased. However, the apartment didn't have charging capabilities. Public charging stations were inconvenient and expensive. The car couldn't be practically used. Selling it recovered $70,000. The stupidity was buying a $100,000 Tesla to prove electric cars were practical, discovering you couldn't charge it, selling for $70,000, and losing $30,000. 41. Someone cut off their entire family to prove they didn't need them after an argument, regretted it for a decade. After a family argument about independence, cutting off all contact was announced to prove they weren't needed. Years passed in isolation. Major life events occurred without family support. By 10 years, the loneliness and regret were overwhelming. Attempts to reconnect were rejected. The family had moved on. The stupidity was cutting off your entire family to win an argument, being alone for 10 years, trying to reconnect unsuccessfully, and losing your family forever. 42. A person dropped out of college to prove their degree wasn't necessary, then struggled to find work for years. After professors stressed the importance of the degree, this person insisted degrees were unnecessary in the modern world. To prove the point, dropping out occurred with 1 semester remaining. Job hunting revealed most positions required degrees. Years of underemployment followed. Eventually, returning to finish the degree became necessary. The stupidity was dropping out of college to prove degrees weren't necessary, struggling to find work, and eventually needing to finish the degree anyway. 43. Someone invested $50,000 in a friend's business to prove they trusted people after being called cynical, lost everything when the business failed. Called cynical for not trusting people easily, this person invested $50,000 in a friend's business to prove trust. No due diligence was done. That would seem distrustful. The business failed within a year. The $50,000 was completely lost. The stupidity was investing $50,000 without due diligence to prove you trusted people, losing everything when the business failed, and proving your cynicism was justified. 44. A person underwent unnecessary surgery to prove doctors would find something wrong, suffered complications, and paid $40,000. After insisting something was medically wrong despite tests showing nothing, doctors were pressured for exploratory surgery. The surgery found nothing wrong. However, complications from the unnecessary surgery occurred. Additional procedures cost $40,000. The stupidity was demanding unnecessary surgery to prove something was wrong, finding nothing, suffering complications, and paying $40,000. 45. And finally, someone died attempting a dangerous stunt to prove their skill after an argument, leaving behind a family and proving nothing. After being told a certain stunt was too dangerous, this person insisted their skill level made it safe. To prove the point definitively, the stunt was attempted without safety equipment. Midway through, something went wrong. The fall was fatal. Death occurred instantly. The family was devastated. The argument about skill level was irrelevant. The person was dead. Friends who had doubted the skill felt terrible, wishing they'd been more forceful in preventing the attempt. The funeral was attended by hundreds who couldn't understand why proving a point was worth dying for. Insurance didn't pay out due to the reckless nature of the death. The family faced financial hardship on top of grief. The person's children grew up without a parent because winning an argument seemed more important than safety. Years later, those who knew the story used it as the ultimate cautionary tale about letting ego override judgment. The stupidity was attempting a deadly stunt without safety equipment to prove your skill, dying in the attempt, leaving behind a devastated family, causing financial hardship, and proving that winning an argument is never worth your life. These catastrophic attempts to win arguments prove that being right means nothing if you destroy your life in the process, that ego is the most expensive addiction, and that some victories cost more than any defeat ever could. Every single person lost far more than they could ever gain by winning their argument. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed these argument-winning disasters, and remember, being wrong and admitting it is infinitely better than being right and destroying yourself. Most arguments aren't worth winning, and sometimes the smartest thing you can say is you might be right. These people learned that lesson the hard way, or in some cases, never learned it at all, sacrificing everything to win arguments that didn't matter.